All right, so in this video, I am going to go through each of the parameters in the Aux Tools Texture Importer HDA. I'm just going to start from the top and go through them, show you how they work, and also talk about their limitations. Okay, so first up, we have the Include Cop Preview toggle up here. If we enable that, we can see that it needs a CopNet and a preview geometry. So what this will do is it will, as it imports the texture into Redshift, it'll also import the textures into a CopNet so that we can preview them in the viewport. Let's just go ahead and do that. Let's give it a CopNet, give it a geometry node. Note that the geometry does need to have UVs on it for it to work with the CopNet preview. Okay, let's go ahead and import that. And check out the CopNet. And we can see that it has imported our texture. Make sure that you have display materials on the object. This is not color on the geometry. This is a material set on the object. And it will interact nicely with your light. If we go into the CopNet, we can see it imports as a subnetwork. This is nice. So if you do like a large import of multiple textures, each of them will have their own subnet. And so a few things to note here. One is Copernicus is in beta. It is unstable, and some of the behaviors are not that great. So I am bringing in the height. I'm importing the height map, but in using the height map, I've noticed it's broken. It just is pretty bad. So I have that not having that implemented at this time. Maybe in the future that'll work. And I've also noticed that the CopNets will error out sometimes, and they kind of don't recover. Every time you go in and out of them, they'll start to throw errors, and you might need to either restart Houdini or create a new CopNet. All right, another thing to note is what you see here in the viewport should match up with the render. Let's go ahead and try that. Well, let me assign the texture first. And we can see that it looks like it is matching up. So it'll match up if you do not have triplanar set, and also if you keep the scale texture to 1. If you change the scale, it doesn't quite match up right. The scale will change, but the offset will be translated for some reason, and I haven't figured out how to correct that yet. And you can still use this if you use triplanar. It's just that it still needs UVs, and it won't represent the triplanar look. It'll still look like just using standard non-triplanar surfaces. Okay, here we have the texture output menu, and the options are Redshift, Karma, MTLX Alpha, and CopNet Alpha. Now, for this release, I'm really only supporting Redshift. Redshift should support all of the different options that is included in the HDA. Karma will import. It will import textures. It can also import triplanar textures, and it can import multiple textures at the same time. But a lot of the features, like the controller parameters and a lot of these configurations don't apply to, almost none of these configurations apply to the Karma materials. And the reason I stopped focusing on Karma was because it has been kind of a pain to work with. I'm really rooting for Karma, and I may develop this further in the future, but as it is right now, it's a pain to work with, and and a lot slower to really like check compared to using Redshift. So maybe in the future, definitely let me know in the comments if enough people are interested. I can add full support for Karma. CopNet, this one I definitely will fully support in the future. Right now, it just loads some of the textures, some of the common PBR textures into a CopNet, which is similar or I think the same as include cop preview. You can do triplanar textures in a CopNet, but they still require UVs unless there's another way to do it. So it isn't supported here. I don't really see the point of it. For me, the whole point of using triplanars is not sticking UVs on a complex mesh. So just to wrap that up, I'm really only supporting Redshift. If you have a problem with the Karma side of it or the CopNet side, you can ask me about it, but I might not have time to look into it. Okay, so triplanar again. This will just give you a triplanar version of the material. Set up some triplanar nodes, which is nice. Now, if you import textures and then you change your mind about whether you want it to be triplanar or not, you can just click it and run import over again. That you may have some extra nodes in your material network left over from either one of them, switching between them, but it should work. A safer bet when you do that is, well, first, not to do it. You can just cause some issues that are unforeseeable. But you can try using replace existing nodes. This is nice because what it'll do is when it goes in to create the material, it'll actually just straight up replace this whole node. So any structure you have in here, any setup, any connection, all the nodes in here will be erased and replaced with a new node, which will give it kind of a clean start. Okay, texture directory. This needs to be a directory. If you're only importing one texture, it needs to be a directory that contains texture images. If you're importing multiple directories, so like my directory here, then you'll need to click on import subfolders, and it'll treat each directory in each folder within this directory as a texture and we'll import it. Material network, that's just the material network. It can be in Solaris if you want. The nice thing about the materials I'm importing, it's using a USD material builder anyway, so you can give it a Solaris network. You can even take this right here and paste it over into a Solaris network and it should work. Okay, material name. So what this will do, let's just say my rock mat. What this will do is it'll just give us a name on the material. So if we run that import, let me just do one material. I'll do basalt cliff. Okay, so I still have my basalt cliff from before in here, but let me go ahead and run this, and it'll give me my rock mat. So now assign my rock mat, and we have my rock mat in here. And if we run a different texture on this same run, it will override. It'll override the things in here. And you may also, again, you'll have like leftover textures unless you have replace existing nodes ticked here. So this could be useful for different things. Next on our list, we have material assignment. And I explained this before. If you just pass in a material assignment node, it gives you the option when you click this assign, it will look at this node and it'll get this parameter here and it'll assign the material. Create link to controller. I'm going to patch this out. I'm not going to give you this option. I'm just always going to create the link controller. I don't see why not. I was thinking before, like, what if you wanted your materials and you wanted to copy this over somewhere else? It has all the has all these linked parameters in it. But there's an easy solution for that. If you just right click, parameters and channels, delete all channels, and that will free up all these parameters, and it'll keep the values that were whatever values that were set, and free them up so that you can copy and paste them somewhere else if you want. So that's going away. Don't worry about that. Replace existing nodes. I explained that a bit. It just deletes the materials and rebuilds them, so you can rerun this. Import subfolders. I already explained that. Import count for layering. Okay, this is fun. Well, we'll do this. I'm gonna go ahead and delete all spare parameters. Okay, replace existing. Don't need that. Okay, import count for layering. So let's just go ahead and crank this up to 3. Run the import, and now we have 3 instances of this same texture. So this is nice. Like if we want to, for example, on this rock, I do have I have these damaged edges, and they are a group, and so I can assign the main material to everything, and then I can assign another material for the damaged edges, but it's the same material, and they could be maybe more rough and a lighter color, give it some distinction without needing to set up a more complex attribute-based shader setup. So you could just go in here, if the basalt cliff 2 was assigned to the damaged edges for the material, you'd be able to just increase the gamma, and you can go in there and change the roughness if you want. Another reason you'd want all this is I'll go over a material blender HDA node later, and in that one we can blend the materials together, and this one you can set at a different scale, and the third one at a different scale, and you can layer them on top of each other so that you'll have a less repeating pattern, and that works for the surface, the normal, and the displacement. All right, so that's all the nodes on the front. Let's go ahead and look at the controller options here. Now this may change in the future. I may add some things or rearrange them, but basically, and also, if anyone has feedback, anyone who purchases this product, if you have any feedback or kind of things you'd want to see here, let me know. But we just have some high level things available to us. So we have the texture scale, we have a scale divisor. This can be helpful for large terrains. This just divides. This is the number that is dividing the texture scale, and that can be set on all the imports. I'll go over that in the import config later. Just some easy things. Ambient occlusion blend, our displacements. This is for tessellation. Triplanar blend, if you're using triplanar. We have our color correction. This is pretty self-explanatory, easy to use. The normal, this is just really handy. I've just noticed that there's a lot of different normals out there in the wild, and I'm not quite sure of the history of normals and all the different ways normals are set up, but I found that sometimes I import my normals and they are very messed up. So I've often needed to try one or both of these and even adjust the normal amount, the object space normal or tangent space normal. And I'll go a little bit more over these in the config as they're different for the triplanar and non-triplanar. Another nice high level control we have is the displacement ranges. So many times, or most of the time, I find I want my displacement not to go from 0 to 1, but from -1 to 1, so that any value below 0.5 will go into the geometry, and any value over 0.5 will go out of the geometry when doing tessellation displacement. All right, now I'm going to go over the parameters and the import config. So how the import config works is all these things, all these options, they work at the time of the import. Just ignore these two things down here. The rest of all of this, this only works at import time. If you change these after import, they will not reflect. You'll have to rerun this. And some of these you will need to delete all the parameters first before you run it, and the values will take hold. If there are existing parameters with values, those will maintain their values. Okay, so we have auto layout node network. So if you imported your materials, or you have a material network that you don't want to change the layout of, you can uncheck this and it will leave these nodes where they are. Otherwise, every node in here and every node in the material networks will be auto laid out. Okay, skip if connected. So what this does is if you go in and you modify your material, let's say you had a different idea for what you wanted plugged into your base color, and just pretend with me that we wanted, this is a color node and we want it in the base color. And if we rerun this again, this will just reconnect that up. So if we have that skip if connected toggled on, what it'll say is, hey, I'm looking to connect this here, but if I'm already connected, then just don't connect anything. So that can be a handy way to maintain, if you need to rerun something, but you want to maintain your connections to any of the connections happening in here, then you can toggle that option for yourself. Okay, texture scale, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's matched over with what you see come up over here. So all these options over here are found in the import config. So the normal map options, this one is for without triplanar. And I have unbiased normals checked in here and flip normals checked. These aren't set by default, but with the materials I'm working with right now, the normals are very messed up unless they're flipped, and I need to have unbiased normals checked. Otherwise, the normals are not looking right for me. For triplanar options, what I have set here, well, we have a triplanar scale. And we have the default for this is object space normal. I noticed that that's what's worked with the same textures. I noticed that the normal height at 1 looks really messed up. And it also could be my limited knowledge of normals. So if someone else is using this and they see that maybe it's not set up correctly or behaving strangely, and they know the correct best way to have this as a default, let me know. Otherwise, it's here for you to change for yourself. And That's why I included it as a high level control, because it's been a kind of a pain point for me to figure out what the right thing is, and it's nice to kind of just be able to change it, uh, especially if you're going to do a batch import and you know the configurations you want and don't want to go in by hand afterward. All right, for this last part of explaining the texture importer parameters, we have custom maps and custom attributes under the import config tab. And what this does is if you have a map in your directory, in your texture directory, that has a strange name or just an extra map that my script doesn't pick up, you can specify that file substring that'll match here. Being mindful that some substrings, if it matches with a different texture, then it can create some problems. So it needs to be clear enough to only match to the texture that you want to import. We have what type it is. So when this is imported into Redshift with the Redshift texture file node, you can set that here, what kind of texture it is. And finally, we can connect it up to whatever input to the material surface node that we want. And if we have do override enabled, what this will do is it will override anything the script is doing. So for example, here I'm looking for base color and I want to connect it into MS color. That's fine. But if I wanted to connect it into base color, what this would do is it will unplug whatever the script originally puts in as the base color, which is coming from the color correction node. And instead it'll just use whatever I say here. I can put any texture that matches this will be connected into here. If I do not do the override, then the original script will stand and this will actually not be plugged in if it matches an input surface that is already matched by the script. Okay, and down here we have custom attributes. So what this will do is it'll set up a point attribute lookup and and then connect it into the corresponding input on the material surface that you want. Now this, the image type is different. We only have mono or color. And the setup I have here with this rock, we have calculated some thickness, and we have also applied some color based on that thickness. So what I have connected up here, let me change this back to MS amount. This is the subsurface scattering. This is the subsurface scattering radius. Oh, that's the amount. So this needs to be the color, subsurface scattering color. Okay, so what this is going to do is it is going to look for the color attribute and import that in, that point attribute lookup, and it'll plug it into MS radius. This one will look up the thickness that we have calculated here, and that will be in the MS amount. So if I go ahead and run this, and we go into the material, we can see that the custom map matched the base color, and this also is obviously already matched by the script, but since it's already here, it'll just use the texture import that already is, and it will map it over to the MS color that I specified in the HDA. We have our thickness attribute that was brought in as a custom attribute, and the color that was brought in and connected up to what was set. So this is nice, especially if you're going to do multiple imports. It'll set the same setup for every texture that you import. And let's go ahead and see what our result is. Define material. I think we're good. And yeah, and that's it. So we have all that going on. The color is in the subsurface scattering radius. The thickness is specifying the amount of subsurface scatter. Okay, I just want to show you real quick the code that is parsing the file names for the texture files. So what this is for each key in this Python dictionary, it will search for any of these substrings contained in the file name. And if it finds a match, it will treat it as whatever belongs to the key. And this does favor a PBR metallicity based workflow. There's that specular workflow I'm not as familiar with, but that will work as well. I believe the scripts will just invert the glossiness and plug it into roughness or something like that. I can't remember. But if it's not behaving correctly, let me know and I can adjust to make it work correctly for a specular workflow. So each of these are all the ones I'm looking for. And if there's anything missing from here, you can always use the custom maps option in the HDA. If there's something that you think is staple that belongs here, that is a major part of your workflow, I sure wouldn't mind updating this dictionary to add it in and treat it correctly. One big thing to note is if there's a substring in here that happens to match a file name, it can create problems. So for example, AO, ambient occlusion, it can look for a substring just AO. So if there's the letters AO next to each other in a file string and it's not ambient occlusion, it might be picked up as ambient occlusion. In the script, what I've done is AO actually comes last because it has that kind of possibility more than any other. And so the other textures, if it matches them first, it'll be taken by those. And if there is a texture that is not ambient occlusion and does not match any of the other textures, but does have the text AO in the file name, it could accidentally be picked up by this parsing and be treated as an ambient occlusion map. So that's just something to be aware of. And not just here, but also if you're defining a custom map, make sure that the substring only matches the file name that you want. So it needs to be only a substring of that file name that won't match any other one. And also note that all these are case insensitive. So if your file name has capital letters in it, that won't matter. They'll be turned into lowercase for the matching. All right, that wraps up our overview for this OxTools Texture Importer HDA. If you have any more questions about this, comment on the video. If you are a customer and have a feature request, you can message me on whatever platform you purchased the item from. Please don't message here on like YouTube.